August 30th, 1987, a female's body was found about 50 feet off Santa Ana Canyon Road near the Riverside Freeway in Anaheim, California. A red handkerchief and a cord were found near the body, and it was believed that she was between 15 and 19 years old. Unable to determine her identity, she became known as Anaheim Jane Doe. After an extensive investigation, which included the first ever clay model facial reconstruction in Orange County, the case went cold. In 2005, a DNA profile was developed of the victim, but it matched no one in any databases. In 2018, the DNA Doe Project began assisting with the case to help determine the woman's identity using genetic genealogy and narrowed it down to possible matches. From there, a relative was asked to upload their genetic material to GEDmatch. The coroner's office then used forensic dentistry to legally confirm her identity. On January 17, 2019, the Orange County Sheriff's Department announced the victim's identity as Tracey Coreen Hobson. Tracey was 20 years old at the time she disappeared in the summer of 1987. She was a former Anaheim, LA Murata High School student and also lived in Anaheim, the same city she was found in. It is unclear whether a missing persons report had been filed on her, and the circumstances of her disappearance remains a mystery. The Sheriff's Department is now focusing on the investigation of her homicide and bringing her killer to justice, but thankfully after 32 years, Tracey finally got her name back. As a reminder, if you want to donate to the nonprofit DNA Doe Project that uses volunteers and has many lab costs to make these identifications happen, now would be a great time. Even if it's just $5, go to DNADoeProject.org. On May 25, 1981, law enforcement recovered an unidentified woman from a low-water crossing at Mill Creek on Highway MM near Dixon, Missouri. It was determined that she was the victim of a homicide. It was estimated that she was between the ages of 25 and 40 years old and possibly killed the day before she was found. She was believed to be white with American Indian descent. She had a full upper denture plate, and her clothes seemed put on hurriedly. Her jeans pockets were pulled out as if someone was emptying them to make sure they didn't miss anything, and her shoes were missing. Her bra had a written word that appeared to read Jubel, Juliet, or Julie. Unable to determine her identity, she became known as Pulaski County Jane Doe and was buried in the Waynesville Cemetery in a grave marked Jane Doe. Isotope testing later showed that the decedent hadn't lived in Missouri for more than a few years and most likely spent most of her life in the southeastern region of the United States. In 2015, her body was exhumed to obtain DNA to try to identify her. In late 2019, the Sheriff's Office enlisted the help of the DNA Doe Project, who then extracted a DNA sample from her remains and uploaded a DNA profile to GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. After matches in the second cousin range were produced, which only took a few hours, its team of genetic genealogists were able to locate a possible brother of the victim located in Alexandria, Virginia. After agreeing to provide his DNA, it was determined he was indeed a brother to the victim, and 40 years later, she was finally identified as Karen Kaye Knippers. He confirmed that he did have a sister that his family lost contact with in the early 1980s. Karen was born December 5, 1948 in Florida. She lived in the St. Louis area around the time of her murder and was 32 years old when she was killed. But it's unknown why she was in Pulaski County at the time. Karen was married to Harold Clayton Sturgill from Indiana. He was a truck driver for Goodwill Industries and later died in 2008. It is unknown if he was involved in her murder, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. On March 21, 1984, human remains were discovered in a wooded area west of the Burien Little League ball field in what is now the suburb of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport in Seattle, Washington. The ball field's manager would get a shocking surprise when his dog brought home a bone that looked human, prompting him to call the police. Within minutes, police arrived at the field, and an officer spotted the rest of the remains. Investigators determined they belonged to a white female between the ages of 12 to 18 years old and had been there for at least a year. Unable to determine her identity, she became known as Bones 10 Jane Doe 1984 or Jane Burien Doe. Turns out, she was the victim of Gary Ridgway, known as the Green River Killer, who had confessed and pleaded guilty in 2004 to leaving several of his victims near a baseball field off Des Moines Way. The remains of another victim, Cheryl Williams, was also found 100 feet away around the same time. Thanks to help from the nonprofit DNA Doe Project and forensic anthropologist Kathy Taylor using genetic genealogy, Bones 10 Jane Doe, the youngest victim of Gary Ridgway, was identified as 14-year-old Wendy Stephens in early 2021. Wendy was born in 1968 and was from Denver, Colorado, but ran away from home. Her family then reported her missing. Early in 2019, one of Wendy's parents had taken a direct-to-consumer DNA test and uploaded the results to GEDmatch, hoping to learn the fate of their daughter. Unbeknownst to the parent, GEDmatch changed the setting on that kit in May 2019 as part of their new policy regarding law enforcement access to matches. Because the parents' kit remained opted out, when the DNA Doe Project uploaded Jane Doe's data in September 2020, that important connecting lead, which would have immediately solved the case, was not available to the team. The Green River Killer was active in the 1980s and 1990s, but mostly from 1982 to 1984. His victims were young girls or women believed to be runaways or sex workers that were picked up along Pacific Highway South and then placed in the secluded, wooded areas around the Green River in Washington State, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, and various other sites around and within South King County, Washington. He later explained that he had killed all of his victims inside King County and that he had only transported and placed the remains of 2 women near Portland, Oregon to confuse the police. Interestingly, Ted Bundy assisted investigators in trying to identify and catch the Green River Killer. Although Ridgway was suspected to be the Green River Killer as early as 1983, it wasn't until 2001, with the help of a saliva sample that he gave in 1987 and advances in technology, that he was arrested for the murders of 4 women: Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, Cynthia Hines, and Carol Ann Christensen. Forensic science would also help to identify 3 more victims, which were added to the original indictment: Wendy Cofield, Deborah Bonner, and Deborah Estes. In 2003, he pleaded guilty to murdering 49 women, but in taped confessions has cited the numbers to be as high as 65 and even up to 71 women in total, but says he lost count. Ridgway is currently 72 years old, serving 48 life sentences at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, Washington. Sadly, 2 more of his victims have yet to be identified. One is known only as Bone 17 and was discovered on January 2, 1986 near a cemetery in southeast King County. He pleaded guilty to killing her but could not remember her name. The other unidentified victim is known only as Bones 20, and King County recently submitted bone fragments from her remains for familial DNA extraction. She was located on August 21, 2003, in an area adjacent to Ken Des Moines Road in Kent, Washington, south of Seattle. Ridgway directed investigators to the spot, and it's believed she died between 1970 and 1990 and was between the ages of 13 and 24 years old. Hopefully, these last 2 unidentified victims will get their names back soon. On July 15, 1980, the body of a woman was located in McFarland, California in an almond orchard. Tire tracks were observed at the scene, and it was determined that she was murdered the day before. She died from a stabbing and was then transported to the location she was found. The woman was possibly picked up from a now-closed bar known as Ruby's that was located in Lemoore. It was believed that she was between the ages of 25 and 35 years old and either white, Native American, or Hispanic. She had two unique tattoos. One was a heart containing the words "I love you, Shirley, and Seattle," and another that read "Mother and I love you." She also had scars on her abdomen and buttock, as well as surgical screws and plates and a metal rod in her left leg. There was no serial number, and the model may have been created during the 1960s, but could have been installed at a different time. She had also likely given birth at least once. All of her upper teeth were missing, and she was intoxicated at the time of her murder, as her blood alcohol was 0.3%. Unable to determine her identity, she became known as Kern County Jane Doe. In 2018, the DNA Doe Project took on her case. Meanwhile, a woman named Violet Soosay saw her sketch on a Facebook post by the DNA Doe Project seeking answers to her identity. She realized the woman they described was likely her aunt. Violet had been searching for answers about her aunt for 40 years and had already tested her DNA on Ancestry, but it wasn't until she came across the Facebook post that she shared the info on GEDmatch. The woman was indeed the niece of Kern County Jane Doe, which led to her real name in April 2021, Shirley Ann Soosay. Shirley was born in 1945, and her aunt said that she left the reserve in her early 20s and began working in Edmonton, Canada. She then went to live in Vancouver and later possibly in Washington, and may have used the name Rebecca or Becky Ocho. The last time Violet recalled seeing her at home was when she was 17 after her oldest brother passed away in 1977. Her other family members last saw her in 1979. The DNA Doe Project believes Shirley is one of the first members of the First Nations people to be identified through forensic genealogy. One of her ancestors was a member of the Samson Cree Nation. At the time she was identified, her killer was already behind bars for her murder and another woman's murder. In 2015, DNA evidence linked her to another unidentified woman known as Ventura County Jane Doe 1980. However, they were not linked directly to each other, but rather to their killer. Wilson Choest was convicted in 2018 for Shirley's murder and the murder of a pregnant woman found at the foot of a dirt hillside in the rear parking lot of Westlake High School in Thousand Oaks, California. The Ventura County District Attorney's Office tried him on the murders even before the victims were identified because his DNA was found on both victims, who were discovered just 3 days and one county apart. His DNA was recovered from Shirley's fingernails, clothing, and a bottle of Michelob beer found near her body. He had been released from prison a month before the two killings. Following his arrest in 2015, Choest was tried in May 2018, and 3 of his surviving victims testified about the attacks they had experienced. He was ultimately sentenced to serve 2 life sentences in prison. The 2 women were described as being well-groomed and had no known arrests in the state, as their fingerprints did not match any on file. DNA and dental records were also obtained but have since failed to identify Ventura County Jane Doe, and Choest has refused to give any information about the slayings. After one of the murders, Choest allegedly told Patrick Scott Bell about killing a woman. Bell and his brothers then assisted Choest with cleaning the vehicle he had used. When confronted by their mother, Carolyn Bell, one of the brothers had a strange reaction and claimed Choest had struck and killed a deer. Carolyn did not inform the police about this incident until her questioning in 2013. Ventura County Jane Doe was 5 months pregnant when she was murdered. She had also given birth at least once and had an episiotomy scar. In November 2021, the unborn son's father was located, but he was unable to provide any new information on her identity. It's possible the biological father is from Choluteca, Honduras, and that he or his parents had the surname Baca. Hopefully soon, Ventura County Jane Doe will get her name back as well. On August 15, 1978, Police were called to investigate human remains found by a logging crew in a remote wooded area in the township of Knapp near the village of Warrens, Wisconsin. The results of a limited autopsy indicated the deceased was a white male between the ages of 28 and 52 who had been there anywhere from 1 to 4 years, and the manner of death was presumed homicide. Found near the remains were a silver-colored Metastud brand earring normally used by piercing salons. Also nearby were garbage bags that appeared to have been converted into a makeshift carrying device with twist ties, masking tape, and chains. Unable to determine the victim's identity, he became known as Jackson County John Doe 1978 for the next 43 years. The DNA Doe Project was first contacted for assistance with this case in early 2019. After DNA extraction, sequencing, and bioinformatics were complete, files were uploaded to GEDmatch in September of 2020 and to Family Tree DNA in late November. Within 3 days, they were able to identify Jackson County John Doe 1978 as Dennis Regan McConn, and it was publicly announced in March 2021. Dennis was born in 1947 in DeKalb, Illinois, and attended DeKalb High School. He was last seen by his family leaving his home on 10th Avenue in Kenosha, Wisconsin in 1977 at the age of 29. His remains were found a year and a half later, 230 miles from home. The sketch appears older as it was based on the oldest age estimate of 52. 1971 in Illinois, Dennis's brother Kenneth would be arrested for shooting another male but was released on bail. While out, he would also become the victim of homicide like his brother. There are still very few details about Dennis's life, and as of today, the person responsible for his death has never been identified.